Hey guys, so today I'm going to be showing you one of the highest damage rotations in the game and something that is really fun to execute if you get it down properly. And of course, I'm talking about Hunter Grapple Melee. And the reason why this is so good is because in Edge of Fate, they made it so the combo blow finally stacks with grapple, and they also changed melee buffs to be additive while still keeping grenade buffs to be multiplicative. The buffs from the grenade and melee stats are both multiplicative, however, and the real icing on the cake is the fact that grapple continues to count as both a grenade and a melee simultaneously, allowing us to do crazy amounts of buff stacking and making this build one of the strongest in the entire game. And just to quote Aegis' video here, even though our setup is a little bit different from the one in his video, the difference between Grapple Hunter post Edge of Fate and pre Edge of Fate is astronomical. And so this begs the question, Resorix, what do you need as prerequisites? Well, obviously you need Navigator, because for those of you that don't know, the Navigator Catalyst allows you to put down a grapple point which will stay active as long as you keep grappling to it every so often. You then need 1-2 punch shotguns, and the 1-2 punch perk states that hitting a target with nearly every pellet in a shot increases melee damage for a short duration. And this is actually a 150% additive melee buff, and you ideally run Perfect Paradox on your damage loadout because of its origin trait, which basically reloads a magazine from its reserves whenever you hit a grapple, and this allows you to keep grapple meleeing without having to worry about reloading, and it's also a rapid fire frame, which is an added bonus because it has the most ammo, and this just makes it perfect for 1-2 punching. But other alternatives can work if you don't own Perfect Paradox, such as Swordbreaker. And it has Damage in the first slot, which is an alternative perk and reloads on grapples. And it's also craftable and much easier to come by as it drops from Crota. And a lot of teams still farm that rate to this day. However, the downside is that it's a lightweight frame and not a rapid fire frame, but at the end of the day, it's not a game-breaking difference, and this is still worth running if you don't have Perfect Paradox. I like running Aikilos in the second slot. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with any reload perks in the first column that really proc off your grapples, but that's fine. The reason I run double shotguns is that I can swap from one to the other if I run out of ammo in one during a damage phase, but since most damage phases are short, this is unlikely to happen anyways, but it is still good to have. You also want a Synthesis class item, and a Arachne class item works as an alternative, since it will help you survive as it grants you Woven Mail every time you grapple, and with how busted combo blows, you can definitely get away without even using Synthesis. So, what does your setup look like? I personally run two loadouts, one for running with Navigator in it, and the second is my damage loadout with Navigator being swapped out for Perfect Paradox. But let's break down a subclass first, since it remains consistent across both loadouts. So, for your super, you want to be running Deadfall Tether, and it's even more potent now as it is now a 35% debuff up from the old 30, and it got changed in Renegades. You want to be running Gambler's Dodge for your dodge, since it will refund your melee every time you dodge. Your jump doesn't really matter, and anything is fine as long as it's not Blink. I'm sorry, Takata. For your melee, you want to be running Combination Blow, and the thing is, with Edge of Fate, it was changed to be a 400% additive buff, up from 237.5, which is a whopping difference. And for Grenade, obviously, if it wasn't already made clear, you want to be running Grapple Grenade. And for aspects, I would say it's kind of mandatory to run Stylish Executioner in one of the slots, and the reason being is that whenever you manage to proc it, and the way you proc it is by killing an ad that is debuffed, and since your tether already debuffs targets, you're going to proc this every now and then, and it gives a whopping 300% additive buff to our melee. And the other aspect is sort of personal preference. You can run basically anything in the slot. I just like running Ascension, just a good utility. Last but not least are fragments. I like to run Faster Protection because it gives you DR when you're surrounded. It also gives you plus 10 melee stat. And the rest of the fragments are just for boosting your stats too. So I like running Devotion, which gives me plus 10 to the melee stat. Sacrifice gives me plus 10 to the grenade stat. And Courage gives me plus 10 to the grenade stat as well. Now let's get into our actual loadouts. So for my running loadout, I like to run Navigator with the Aquila shotgun and a sword for movement. You can swap out the Navigator for another weapon if you want, and the same can be done for the Aquilas and the sword as well. And you can just make a loadout with Navigator in it to put the grapple point down before DPS, so you just have 3 loadouts, but I just like wiping with 2. And another thing is that armor stats are important for this loadout, since this is the loadout that you'll be using to primarily build combo blow stacks up. And you want to run 70 class and 70 melee. The thing is, because with those stats, you'll be able to dodge melee, and you'll just be able to use those in conjunction, just one refunding the other. But something to note is that, let's say you only have 50 melee, you'll still get your melee back if you dodge while you're surrounded, that is, a lot of adds are nearby. But if you have 70, it will refund even if you dodge when not surrounded by adds. In my case, I am also running 146 grenade just to kill enemies quicker with my grapple. This isn't really necessary. And getting into our mods, the only things that are really important here are 1, having something to generate orbs with. So in my case, I am running Strand Siphon and Heavy Handed to generate orbs, which will be useful for armor charges. And stacks on stacks on my boots makes accumulating armor charges a little bit less cumbersome. Now, point number 2 is that you need something that consumes armor charge. Now, you might be asking, well, why is that important? Because you have something that consumes armor charge on your second loadout. Well, with Renegades, they made a significant change to how armor charges work. Before, you could swap off a loadout with non-decaying armor charges to a damage loadout with decaying armor charges and not lose any armor charges in the process. But with Renegades, they made it so that you lose all your armor charges if you swap off a non-decaying armor charge loadout to one with decaying armor charge. So just to make sure that I don't lose anything, I just run 2 decay mods right here, a grenade font and a melee font. I also run charged up on the chest piece just to increase the stacks. That's not really that important. Third point is that you should run time dilation, as without it, your armor charge is going to decay quite fast and you might end up in a damage phase with your armor charge basically running out or having run out before you even start the damage phase. Now, for my class item, I like running a Inmost Syntho build here, and this is something that you can swap out for something else if you'd like. And let's get into our damage loadout. So for my damage loadout, I run Perfect Paradox, like I mentioned before, the Aquila shotgun, and a sword. Now here, you want to go all in on maximizing your grenade and melee stats. So try to aim for 160 grenade and 160 melee. Obviously, you want to prioritize grenade over melee. And the reason for that is because 200 grenade gives you a 65% multiplicative buff, whereas 200 melee, or 200 grenade, sorry, 200 melee only gives you a 30% multiplicative buff. So it is much better having a 1.65 times multiplier than a 1.3 times multiplier if you prioritized melee instead of grenade. And now the reason I say 160 is because you can squeeze out the rest using armor fonts like I do here. So I run 2 grenade fonts, which adds 40 stats to my grenade, and so I will have 200 grenade because I have 160 grenade already. And I have a free slot for melee fonts, so I just use a melee font right here. You also want to try to get as close to 70 class as possible, preferably 70 if you can, 70 or higher if you can, because you might need to keep up combo blow during the damage phase if the damage phase necessitates it by being long enough. Now for your exotic class item, you can run Syntheseps if you believe that you're going to be surrounded by adds, and Syntheseps is super nice because it adds a 165% additive buff to your melee. And let's say that you don't have Syntheseps, or you're not getting surrounded, or you're needing more survival, more DR, so you can get away with running Arachne, because even without the added melee buff from Syntheseps, our grapple just still does a lot of freaking damage. And Arachne might prove to be the difference between you surviving a damage phase and not surviving a damage phase, so you can get away with running Arachne. Okay, Resorix, now that we've set all of our loadouts up, how do we actually grapple melee efficiently? So I'm just going to demonstrate on poor Carl over there. just going to go ahead and rally right here. And before we get into the process of actually grappling, I would like to talk about the position of our grapple point, which we're going to create with Navigator. Usually I like to put my grapple point 90 degrees to the side. And the reason why I put my grapple to the side is because ideally you don't want the boss to be between you and the grapple point, as it increases the likelihood of you grappling to the boss instead of to the grapple point, resulting in you losing your grapple grenade. At the same time, the position of the grapple point very much depends on the boss you're trying to grapple and your surroundings. For example, if you take Explicator, I like putting my grapple point above him because his frame is smaller comparatively and it is much more convenient than putting it to the side just because of the design of the room in that encounter. At the same time, if it were Crota, it wouldn't actually be a very smart idea to put the grapple point above him because his frame is very large and you will end up grappling to him instead of to the grapple point. You also have to account for the oversoul because for me personally it is quite hard to distinguish the grapple point from the big looming oversoul in the back because they're pretty much identical colors. Now, I've got a keyboard overlay up here, and I'm going to perform some grapples on Carl, and I want you to pay attention to my input. So I'm going to put my navigator point down, tether, and then swap to my shotgun. Grapple here, making sure to put a 1-2 punch shot after each grapple, so that I have 1-2 punch. And then perform some clean grapples here. Nice rhythm to it. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Now, if you actually notice my inputs, you would have seen that I was holding S for the entirety of that, and the reason for that is because holding S pulls your character backwards and puts you on the ground quicker after Grapple Melee, and it was only something that I discovered recently, and it is that if you're on the ground when you're grappling, you actually follow through with the melee animation pretty much instantly, and this lets you chain melees back and forth over and over and over very cleanly. You know, it's a whole directional keys. For instance, I was holding A and D, I believe, during that. That is personal preference. And instead of holding S, you can also get away with holding W, but I wouldn't really recommend doing this because it pulls you towards the boss and makes grappling rather awkward. Something else that you can do to min-max even further is essentially putting the 1-2 punch shot instantly right after you hit the grapple melee, basically during the animation itself, and this just lets you instantly grapple afterwards instead of waiting to put a 1-2 punch shot in after finishing your grapple animation. So the way you do this is right after you hit the grapple punch, which is my X key, I just spam my shoot button, which is left click, and this makes your gun shoot during the animation, saving you some time. It even makes it look like you're not even shooting your gun, but just chaining grapples back and forth. So I will just show that for you guys real quick. So I'm going to swap to my initial loadout, my running loadout, rally to the flag here, and I'm going to put my grapple point down, tether, swap to DPS loadout, proc 1-2 punch, and then just spam shoot in the midst of my melee. So right there, and you can see the screen shake right there, which is evidence that my shot's actually going through, and at the same time, I am still proccing 1-2 punch. So that is much faster than just waiting to shoot. Now all this is going to take a while to get ingrained in your muscle memory, but trust me, once you get it down, it is super satisfying and it is pretty much optimal for any boss that you're in melee range of. And it's one of the things that actually makes me want to play the game because it's really fun to do. And so obviously in an actual boss environment, you want to make sure you have combo blow up and basically maxed out during the running phase, and before you go into the damage phase, you just want to refresh it so that you have maximum uptime. I'm not going to be showcasing that in the range because it's a little bit tedious just spawning the ads in. Okay, so let's say during grappling, you whiff your grapple, and now you're just stuck there waiting 30 seconds for your grapple to regen. Well, actually, there's a way to get your grapple back instantly using Transcendence. And the cool thing about Transcendence is whenever you come out of it, it fully refunds your normal grenade energy. Now you might be thinking, well, Transcendence is super long, it's basically as long as a roaming super, so you're telling me to wait for it to finish before I get my grenade back? That's really stupid. Well, yes, the answer to that is Transcendence does last very long, but there is a way to cancel your Transcendence. And the same way you can cancel your roaming super by swapping off of it. And how it works is it cancels your Transcendence if you make changes to your subclass while you're mid-Transcendence. And so let's take a subclass, take a look at the subclass real quick. So we're not going to be changing our melee, our grenade, or aspects, or our fragments because that would be very damaging. And we're not going to change your super either, but we can change your dodge without losing much during the damage phase. And so the way it actually works is I'm going to whiff my grenade right here. So I have no grenade. I'm going to pop Transcendence, go into my subclass, change class abilities. Now, once you swap the marksman, you don't really need to swap back to Gambler's Dodge, but I do it anyways. And voila, we have our grenade back up. So that's just a thing to know if you end up missing your grapple. That's something that I take advantage of often because, yes, I make mistakes too. And yeah, I hope I did a decent job with the explanation. That is pretty much everything I think there is to cover. Should be some groundwork for you guys to build up on. I'm just going to play a little clip of the setup in action. That is all from me. Take care, fellas.